Intentional stonewalling is when we might see it being used as a manipulative tactic to try to regain control by withdrawing engagement because they know it's going to trigger their partner into becoming increasingly anxious and destabilized, and that makes them feel more in control when they have felt out of control. You don't have to be pathological to do that. People do that all the time who exist on a normal spectrum. It's not nice, but intention does matter. People can sometimes say, well, I didn't intend to do it, so you don't have the right to be mad at me. Right? That's not the case. We always want to look at impact first and then intention.
In the work of Briana MacWilliam, you can feel her sensitivity to the anguish of people looking to her for bigger answers. This is about why some love hurts and why we fall out of love, about what it means to love someone well, and if there's any logic to love at all. So I wanted to explore some of these questions with Briana MacWilliam. I wanted to see, for those of us in relationships right now, what lies beneath attachment theory. Briana MacWilliam, you talk about how our attachment style determines our success in relationships. Tell me a little about that.
Sure. So attachment styles is essentially a blueprint for how our instinctual mind and body learns to negotiate closeness, meaning how close or how far we need to be from an attachment figure, meaning when we're young, that will be a parental figure or caregiver or whomever is closest in our sphere, so that we can find what we need in order to survive. So for a child, love equals survival. If a parent loves me, then they will take care of me, they will feed me, they will clothe me, they will shelter me, and I will live and I will thrive and I will grow. But if we have parents who struggle with raising a child for whatever reason, or we have been socially conditioned to think about the way we respond to a child's wants and needs, then it can create a certain pattern of response, meaning we learn certain habits, habitual ways of thinking, feeling, and responding that make it, let's say, easier to get the love and the bonding that we need in order to survive. So, for instance, if we have a parent that struggles with emotional confusion, right? And we have a child that has what we call a very active temperament. So children tend to be born with a temperament, which is an inherent way of expressing themselves. And in the past, these temperaments were easy, slow to warm up, or active. They've changed the names to be a little bit more politically correct these days, but more or less that's what they were qualified as. So, for instance, a child that is very active might be very physically excited, might be a little bit louder in their expression, might be very sociable and outward reaching. Now, if we have a parent who understands that and is amenable to that and knows how to channel that, then we might say that is a secure pairing, that this is a good enough environment for that child because the child's needs can be understood and met. But let's say that child has parents who are slow to warm up themselves. So they're a little more sedentary, they're a little more introverted, they're a little more sensitive to their environments, to sound, to noise, to what's going on around them. Now, they might feel as if the child is overwhelming them. They might feel as if the child is too demanding. They might feel as if they are failing as a parent. So now we have these underlying narratives and stories that are influencing the way that parent and child are interacting. And so there will be a confluence of things that goes on inside the child and inside the parent that now informs the way they approach each other, informs the way they communicate with each other, informs the way that they will negotiate space, both regular environmental space and the emotional space between them, to try to get what their emotional needs are met. And so John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth were researchers that really explored this in depth and came up with these 4 categories, basically archetypal patterns and ways that we learn to negotiate those situations. So that is anxious attachment, which has a couple different words in the vernacular. It could be anxious, preoccupied, anxious, ambivalent. But in essence, it is sort of a reaching for a higher level of anxiety, a desire to close the gap or the distance between oneself and another. Then we have avoidant attachment, sometimes called dismissive avoidant attachment. And this is when someone who needs a little bit more space and time apart to feel as if they can regulate themselves and their nervous systems internally. And then we have disorganized attachment. Mary Main called it disorganized attachment. Others have called it fearful avoidant attachment. But this is when someone seems to have both an avoidant and an anxious disposition. But to my mind, what really qualifies that is the presence of dissociation. So this is someone who experiences connection as both threatening and something that they really want and need. So they tend to beckon you closer while pushing you away at the same time. And so this is what we call fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment. And then secure attachment is basically someone who can... It's not that secure people don't have anxious or avoidant tendencies, because this is how our nervous systems respond necessarily to a feeling of threat. So the sympathetic nervous system fights, flies, or freezes. And so if we are anxious leaning, we fight for connection, we fight for the relationship, we reach for it. If we are avoidant leaning, we pull back, we fly away until it's safe to come back. Or if flying away or fighting for it doesn't solve the problem, we freeze because there's no way to navigate the threat. And so this is a normal response of the nervous system. So secure people have anxious and avoidant leanings as well. But what we notice is that if something goes wrong per se, or if there's a conflict or some kind of disruption, they are better able to return to equilibrium and kind of contextualize their experience without making it about their sense of identity and self-worth. So, for example, so-and-so came home and was sharp with me. And if I'm more anxious, I might think, I did something wrong. I said something wrong. What can I do to fix it? And then go about trying to figure out what the issue is without directly asking. So there's a lot of strategizing going on, trying to ease and soothe and make everything calm without having to directly have a direct conversation, because that feels a little threatening. Then we have a more avoidant response might be to feel a rejection sensitivity and pull back. So they're not going to try to fix it or fill a gap. They're going to withdraw. Oh, I must be burdensome. I'm going to pull myself away, because that's what's going to, pulling away is going to preserve the connection here. Whereas if someone's more fearful avoidant, they may do either strategy based on how threatened they feel, or they may do both and then feel and then look to the other person to kind of create an affirmation of that. So they struggle to know what the right move is inside of them. So that's kind of a long explanation, but that is more or less, we adopt these patterns typically early on in life, and then they become habitual, and then they show up in our relationships, and we see these patterns repeating. But it is also possible to adopt that in adulthood. Like, you can have a normal childhood and upbringing and a relatively secure environment, but if you encounter someone who's deeply insecure or carries very rigid filters for the way that they see the world, and the secure person butts up against that, it may be for the first time in their life that they've butted up against someone who has that filter for reality, then they may start to distrust themselves, and they may start to feel increasingly insecure because they are adapting to the insecure partner in the way that we adapt to unsafe parents in childhood. And that is because they are well-meaning and maybe a little bit naive, and they don't understand the underlying dynamics of what's going on. So while attachment styles are usually spoken of more often than not in early childhood, my area of expertise is looking at it, how they manifest in adulthood, particularly relationships.
Yes, that was, you called it a long explanation. I would say that was a short masterclass in what attachment theory is. It's great to lay the foundation here. A couple things came up. You talked about being maybe well-meaning and naive. In these interviews, often I'm talking with people who are experts in manipulation, personality disorders, psychopathy, things like that. So I definitely want to go there. Mm-hmm. But in your first sentence, you used the word blueprint. You said this is a blueprint. I had a man on the show, Dr. Robert Plomin. He's a behavioral geneticist. He wrote a book called Blueprint. And his idea is that the blueprint is in your genes and that nurture, all these things are actually smaller than we maybe make them out to be. How important do you think genetics would be in developing an attachment style?
Well, it's really a confluence of things. It is the social conditioning that you receive. It is genetics that we have found to some degree, particularly in the field of epigenetics. Omri Gillis research looks at the expression. So for instance, folks that have more anxiety, their epigenetics tends to show certain nuances in the expression of the gene that manages oxytocin and dopamine, which seems to make sense, since when we look at folks that self-identify as feeling more anxious leaning, they're usually also folks who want a lot of touch, feel a lot of reassurance with physical contact, affection, holding, cuddling. It's usually one of the highest things they look for in a love language, for instance. Whereas when we look at folks that have more avoidance, they have found that the gene responsible for the expression of serotonin is a little more nuanced. And so if we have low levels of serotonin, that can lead to things like hypersexuality and obsessiveness. Now, folks that are anxious can also experience low levels of serotonin. And this is true if we have trauma in our history. Folks that have an experience of trauma historically are more likely to have a baseline of lower serotonin to begin with. But then if you get into a relationship, then especially a relationship with an insecure partner, they can create what's called an intermittent pattern of reinforcement. So Helen Fisher talks about this when she talks about frustration attraction. But basically, when we receive rewards, so attention, big fun dates, a lot of cuddling, physical affection, things that we enjoy about being connected. When we experience that, we get a little bit of a high, and dopamine and oxytocin, all those juicy chemicals kind of are elicited, and that feels really great. And that's what gets us hooked in a relationship. But for someone that has an insecure attachment style, it usually takes 3 to 6 months before those mechanisms kind of start turning on, because it starts getting real. And they have internalized notions about what a real relationship looks like. And so now they start pulling back. And sometimes that's inexplicably, particularly to someone that doesn't have those same hangups, right? Or doesn't have that same history to inform that way of thinking. So now there's a bit of confusion. And now the insecure partner starts showing up intermittently, meaning predictably unpredictable. And they pull away without explanation or any apparent trigger, because it's usually internal. So now the other partner is confused. They're anxious because they're not receiving explanations. They're trying to figure it out logically, and usually that looks like I must have said or done something wrong. And so now we have stress chemicals turning on in the brain, adrenaline. Dopamine is actually also a stress chemical. And so cortisol. And so these basically hone our focus on a threat. When we have those chemicals turning on, we become hyper-focused on the sense of threat, because that's a protective mechanism. We have to be hyper-aware in order to protect ourselves, right? So now we have adrenaline turning on, which is going to hone our focus on the person. Serotonin drops because we're becoming obsessive. If we've been sexually active with this person now, we've also got serotonin going on, and we've got oxytocin going on, which is going to bond us to them even more intensely. Oxytocin also, they've done studies, show blind us to negative feedback. So for instance, if we had a partner that was unresponsive, or maybe said something that wasn't too kind, or behaved in such a way that we would normally be like, that's a red flag, I should probably pay attention to that. If we have these intermittent patterns of engagement going on, our neurochemicals are kind of in an uproar. And if we are physically intimate with these folks, the oxytocin is going to blind us to that negative feedback. So our decision making is somewhat impaired. And they found that when this happens, the parts of the brain that are normally associated with things like gambling or addiction light up in the same parts of the brain that are associated with kind of attachment experiences that we're talking about. So there is definitely a physiological component to this. And so there's the epigenetic predisposition, There is the neurochemical response that we have just to intermittent patterns of reinforcement. And those things are significant. Add to that, attachment is very much a nervous system response. So the way in which we decide to negotiate those circumstances, if it's an avoidant, an anxious, or a fearful avoidant pattern of response, all that gets negotiated with the meaning that we are making of what we're observing and what we're experiencing, what our bodily response might be, and then the story we write about it. And so to my mind, I mean, I think, someone who's in the medical profession is going to feel biology as a stronger component for sure. But I tend to approach these things from a more spiritual angle. So in my perspective, the body is an expression of spirit, and we are given physiologically the necessary ingredients to create the soup, which makes our spiritual curriculum in this lifetime. So to my mind, and the body is malleable. I mean, the brain has plasticity, which means it can be, it can be healed in many ways. I use that term a little broadly, but especially with the research we're doing in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapies right now, we're looking at, it's particularly helpful for folks that struggle with anxiety or rigid rumination and obsession and thinking patterns, because what it does is psychedelics, when we have a habit of thought, feeling, and behavior, we have certain pathways in the brain that have been carved over years of practice and thinking and assuming, and then looking out into the world with our confirmation bias and looking for evidence to support what we're already thinking and feeling. And so what psychedelics help us do is so what happens is imagine like a tree, right? And as we repeatedly support and find evidence to support what we already think and believe based on past experiences, we start chopping off branches, right? Well, no, that's not possible. That's not possible. So I'm only going to believe and go in either this direction or that direction. So our opportunities become very narrowed. Our beliefs about love and the capacity to attract it and sustain it become very narrow. But what a psychedelic medication or whatever you're using comes along and it sort of waters fertilizer on the brain. And so I'm going to call these dendrites in your brain. These are how the chemical messages travel along your brain and allow you to think the thoughts and make assumptions and perceive things. So what happens is our dendrites get narrowed down to these two branches. We can only think along this highway. But psychedelic comes along, waters the brain, and fertilizes it. And so it creates an opportunity for new branches to grow. And we start looking at things from a different perspective. And all of a sudden, alternative ways of seeing the world, perceiving solutions, coming up with ideas start becoming possible. And that is only if they are nourished, if they're given sunlight, if they have the proper soil, if they are tended to, not pulled at, right? Or ignored, right? Not supported in any other way. So I would say that biology plays a big component, but it's not the only one, and that it is malleable to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Brianna, we're gonna go to the manipulation stuff further, I'm sure, but in hearing you speak, I think we need a little more background on you. So, okay. Art therapy to this sort of stuff, and then you're pulling on these many different domains, and you're saying you see it from a spiritual perspective. Like, how did that journey work for you to where you are now?
Sure. I started as an illustrator. I went to school for illustration and design, fine arts and design. And then I went to school for art therapy because I always really loved psychology, and worked in the field for a number of years. And I worked for Dr. Amen, who is a neuropsychiatrist, and he has his own show, or he used to have his own show on PBS.
Oh, Daniel Amen.
Psychiatrist. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I've seen him. Yeah. Oh, very impressive.
So I worked for him, and when I worked for him, I got a wonderful schooling in, neurochemistry and the brain, and how the brain impacts us on many different levels. And so that sort of helped me weave in more of the understanding of the biological and psychological components with the brain health and understanding the way the body works. And I'm also certified in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, so I've had some clinical education in that realm, but more personally, I've sat in probably more than 20 plant medicine ceremonies at this point. So for me, that was, opened up the spiritual side of things for me, and have had some training. I'm certified in Reiki and hypnotherapy, and things like that. So that brought in this more psycho-spiritual component to the way that I work. And I think once I embraced that for myself personally, that really opened things up for me professionally, because it was like, oh, this for me was the key to really moving from a disorganized attachment style to what they call an earned secure position. But I've been redefining this word healing lately, because when we talk about attachment styles, it's kind of like a puzzle. And when you go to put a puzzle together, you look for the straight edges first, right? I'm going to find the straight edges so I can build out the frame, and then I'll put all the irregular pieces in the middle, and it will be easier to do so. And I think that's when we learn about attachment styles categorically, that's what we're doing, is we're finding the straight edges, because at the core of any insecure attachment experience is emotional confusion. So we're looking for that clarity, and categories help us clarify things. And then once we get beyond that point, now we start to realize, we sort of adopt this attitude, well, if I'm anxious, I'm not secure, which means I have to reduce my anxiety to become secure. If I'm avoidant, I'm not secure, so I have to become less avoidant, and then I will be secure. But to my mind, that where it's a little bit tricky there, because now we're lumping natural temperamental aspects of who you are into this concept of an insecure way of being, and it's not all the same. So I think a better word is alignment. And that's a word that, I've adopted on my journey. It's not so much that we're healing you so you become more secure. We are on a process of unfolding so that you can feel more aligned with the essence of who you really are. And maybe that is a secure version of yourself that has been there and still is there. We've just sort of adopted these stories that make it hard for us to access that energy. So I'm going to stop there.
Okay. And what specifically with this really interesting background that you have took you to attachment theory?
So I had sort of a turning point in my life. So I had been married and divorced. It was probably 5 years after my divorce. I met someone, and it was sort of like the candle that burns brightly, but for a short amount of time. And I ended up having a miscarriage without realizing that I was pregnant. And this was right after we had broken up because he couldn't be faithful. And I was just so bereft over the relationship. And then at the same time, I was let go from my job due to budget cuts. Three of my immediate family members were diagnosed with serious chronic illnesses. And there was a lot kind of happening. My life was sort of turned upside down in a very short time frame. A lot of my attachments were called into question. And and all of that you would think would be hard to carry or to hold, but the only thing I was focused on was this guy who I'd only really known for 9 months. Yeah. Meanwhile, lifelong attachments were being threatened. And I kept thinking, this is bizarre. I'm like, this is really bizarre. What is going on with me? And I just started reading journal articles and looking at things like grief. I also had a few family members pass away around that time. And I started reading about grief and attachment, specifically complicated grief and attachment. And as I was reading about that stuff, also informed some of my knowledge of the brain and whatnot. I just wanted to write. So I started writing, and I reached out to some other therapists and practitioners and asked if they'd like to write about their experience of working with grief, either with clients or personally. And so I wound up putting together a contributed volume about attachment and complicated grief. And I had previously been trying to get published as a paranormal romance writer because I was burnt out, and I was like, I'm not going to be a therapist anymore. I'm going to be a paranormal romance writer.
And that paranormal romance, that's Twilight?
That's like vampires and fantasy, okay. Yes. And And so, but this other thing poured out of me, this clinical research on attachment and grief. And I was talking to other practitioners like, yeah, that'd be cool. And it just sort of flowed through me. I don't even remember really sitting down and having a plan. I'm going to publish a book and reverse engineer all the steps to do that. It was just like, no, I'm just going to write it. This is interesting. Let me write about it. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll try, because I had already submitted things for publication and nothing ever really worked out. And so then I submitted this, and within like a week, I got a yes from Jessica Kingsley Publishers. And so I wound up publishing that book, and that really turned me in the direction of talking about attachment more in a focused, an intentional way. And it was funny because I went back, and at that point I'd been a therapist for 10 years. And I went back to look at my graduate thesis and education from college. And it was actually just by accident. I was like organizing and cleaning things out. And I found one of the papers that I wrote, and it was all about attachment. And it was like, you could pick a theory to analyze something, and I had chosen attachment, and I'm reading it and I'm just like, fuck, like, this is like, oh my God, I was already thinking about this 10 years ago, and it just circled back around. So yeah, it's funny the way that happens.
Yeah, and you say circling around, I mean, it is that sort of Jungian idea that you get close and you might even touch the thing, but you keep working until you really settle on it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you use the phrase complicated grief and attachment. What is the complicated part, and then how does that connect to attachment?
So you might say normal grief is grieving the loss of something because you feel as though you're not going to see them anymore. They're not going to be around in your life. You're going to have to change your habits and patterns because that person is no longer there. Normal grief is grieving the loss of something that you had. Complicated grief is kind of grieving the loss of something that you never had and now believe you never will. And it's more that complicated grief is when we really feel as if a part of ourselves has died and is unrecoverable. And how that led to attachment was they were exploring how there was a kind of grief that persisted. It is resistant to treatment. It's not alleviated with things like medication for depression or anxiety. Normal grief rituals do not abate the feeling. And they found that people who had insecure attachment styles were more likely to experience complicated grief than any other style. And really, just to make it simple, it's because our sense of self and identity is tied up in the idea that it belongs to someone else. And we haven't quite grounded ourselves into a core sense of self and identity. And so it feels as if our survival is threatened by the loss of someone. And it just goes deeper. So that's why, in my perspective, we really have to get in touch with a sense of the transcendent or the spiritual, because insecure attachment at its core is a fear of death, because these are patterns that we learned at an early age to negotiate survival. Love equals survival. So if I lose my attachment figure, then part of me is dead and I can't recover it. And there's a feeling of betrayal. If I allow myself to recover, if I allow myself to love again, if I allow myself to live with a sense of vitality, then I have betrayed my love object and I have betrayed love in and of itself. And that makes me bad. And so we have these early splits that we carry about being good and bad, and now we're falling into the rabbit hole of shame, and how our insecurities also stem from the shameful messages we got around simple and complex shame binds. So for instance, maybe we had a normal upbringing, but you knew your parents loved you and your needs were met and a roof was over your head and everything was pretty good, but there was an undercurrent of feelings like angry feelings or uncomfortable feelings or conflicted feelings not being quite welcome, or people not really knowing quite how to handle it. And so it wasn't so obvious as like fighting in the house or addiction issues or things like that, or even verbal abuse per se. It was more like when you express something, there was either no response, or there was a dismissed, a kind of a dismissive response, or you just somehow got the message that this is not quite okay. And so a lot of it's very subtle and hard to articulate. It's a little bit insidious. So what happens is we kind of get the message. A simple shame bind might be, ooh, nobody likes it when I'm angry. So anger is bad. I'm not going to feel it. Or when anger comes up, I'm not going to entertain it, right? So that's a simple shame bind, because we just have to change your relationship to anger. Now, a complex shame bind is when it's not just that anger is bad, but you are selfish for being angry. You have no right to your feelings about this. And so now a more complex shame bind is about your identity. So the work here is not about changing your relationship to anger, because if I were to say to you, so let's work with your anger, and I haven't addressed the underlying identity piece that is tied to it, like the shame, the selfishness, do I have a right to even feel my feelings, there's an existential crisis existing beneath the rejection of anger. So if I say, well, let's explore your anger, let's feel angry, it's like opening a trapdoor to annihilation. So I see this a lot with avoidance, actually, because they're not gonna, oh no, I can't do it. They're not gonna do that. They're gonna be like, I'm not angry. I don't have any anger. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not mad about that. But I do have this terrible, like, stomach thing that keeps coming back. Or I do have this, like, immune deficiency issue that I can't really figure out. Or I do have this indigestion that no doctor can figure out how to treat. Right.
Yeah. Shame bind. So there are two types with this. First of all, the phrase shame bind is a little new to me, but you're saying it's sort of, maybe the basic kind is an if-then, if this behavior, then there's a shaming, but then the more complicated kind is about if-then, all the way back to you, who you are and your worth as a person. Not just that you're going to be shamed by the group, but that you are worthless.
It's more like, it's more a judgment of your character and identity. So if anger is bad, don't feel anger, right? So, okay, so I'm not going to feel anger, and so anger is bad, I'm not going to allow myself to feel it.
Okay.
But I still think I'm a relatively good person, and I can still negotiate things, and I'm still on the pretty high functioning end of the spectrum, right? I mean, it's all a spectrum, but I'm still pretty high functioning.
And if you were to feel anger, you would still be a good person under this bind?
I just need to correct my management of anger.
Okay.
Right. Whereas if I have a complex shame bind, it's more like I feel angry, which makes me selfish and burdensome. And I don't have a right to feel that way. So I need to make myself small so I stop taking up so much space. Right. And that means it makes me a bad and selfish person.
And then how do these shame binds in sort of a Cliff Notes level connect to our attachment style?
So the deeper the more complex your shame bind, the more likely you are to be probably a little more fearful, avoidant, or disorganized. I would say maybe avoidant after that, and then anxious. Anxiety, I will say, if you feel like you lean more anxious, there's a little bit of a leg up than the other attachment styles, because folks that are anxious already believe that relationship is worth it. They already have bought into the idea that being a social creature is a benefit, and they're open to the idea that I can invite other people into my emotional experiences and share them and find resources that way, right? And of course, that can get them in trouble sometimes, because they don't always have boundaries with it, and they don't always know where that begins and ends in the situation or contextually right in front of them, right? But it is a strength that they have, and it is something that I think is a service to them when they are even doing their work, which is becoming self-advocating, developing better boundaries, learning how to discern between someone who is just having a bad day versus being emotionally manipulative and gaslighting kind of thing. Whereas folks that are fearful avoidant or dismissive avoidant, they got to be convinced first. There's not, life has shown them that relationships are not worth it. And maybe they have needs in a relationship, but because it's not worth it, the safest way to get those needs met is usually through some degree of power dynamics and control. And that, that makes it safer because at least I'm the one holding all the cards, or at least I'm the one dictating how this is going to go. So I would say, in those cases, you're more likely to see a deeper, I would say, complex shame bind. Not that we don't see it with folks that are anxious, because we do, especially folks that may be struggling on the more severe end of the spectrum with codependency, meaning fawning, like giving parts of themselves away and then not realizing it until they are experiencing significant, distress in their life and in their relationships. So, but I would say it's more often that I see that with folks that have fearful avoidance or disorganized attachment, and on the severe end of dismissive avoidance.
It seems that so much of this is about feeling confused. And I wonder, how important is it in your work with people to be clear on memories, childhood, that sort of thing?
So I would maybe change that a little bit. I would say the core issue is emotional confusion. And emotional confusion doesn't have to be tied to a memory. It may stem from a memory, but we don't have to dig up the memory in order to clarify the confusion. So for instance, what is an emotion? It is energy moving through your body. And when we are young, we don't really store that information in a linear way, the way we come to do so as adults. We store it more through metaphor, through storytelling, through symbol, and through play. And a lot of times, if we are experiencing emotional confusion, it's because we were not allowed to play well enough, long enough, or with enough freedom and security that we could use the activity of play to figure out what am I feeling and the nuances of emotion. So, for instance, a lot of people will be able to say, I feel bad, I feel happy, I feel sad. But usually those are blanket terms to describe a myriad of energetic and emotional experiences going on underneath that term. Happiness could be excitement, anticipation, exaltation, joy, but also maybe a little bit of wariness, maybe a little bit of doubt, maybe a little bit of I'm worried it's not going to last, right? So there's actually all these threads that are going on underneath the surface of happy. Sad, additionally, could be, doubt, fears of inadequacy, could be grief on top of relief. Maybe there's actually a sense of relief if we are no longer responsible for something, and then we feel guilty or like we're betraying someone for feeling the relief, even though we're also sad at the same time. And so when we don't have the language for it, it all gets lumped together, and then we experience that all those threads of energy get lumped together into this big tangle, and it wells up, and we're like, oh, I'm anxious, right? Or I'm happy, or I'm sad. And so this is why I say when someone says they're anxious, it's really just the cloud above the fray. It's like if you're looking out at a field and you've got these, like Braveheart, you look out at the field and the two, countries are warring and all the dust from their feet is getting kicked up above them. Anxiety is like the dust, the cloud above the fray. And what we really want to take a look at is what is at war within you. And as we start to peel that onion back is when we start to get the clarity that we need. And it doesn't have to look like a treasure hunt into the past. It can be, where does that, as you say the word anxious, I want you to close your eyes and take a breath and imagine that anxiety lives in your body and your body is a landscape, and drop the question, where does my anxiety live? Like a stone through water, just drop it into the pond of your body, allow it to ripple out and tell me, where does it live? Oh, well, it lives in my chest. Okay. What color is it? What size? What shape? What texture? Let's draw that on the page. Let's talk to it. What does it say? If it had a name, what was it? What its name be? If it is actually functioning in service to you, how does the anxiety think it's helping you? Right? And so now we're in conversation with something that maybe has an origin point in your childhood, but that the contextual memory of that is less important because we're really just working with the energy. It's the energies that's affecting you now, not the pictures in your head.
Mm-hmm. And you said as adults, we have these ways of sort of turning emotions into abstractions, but as children, we do it more through things like play. Mm-hmm. Could you share how that might work in childhood so we could all kind of have a point of reference?
So you are an infant and you are crawling around on the rug and you see a little, like a hard red square block, and there's a chewy, round blue ball next to you. And so you grab the round blue ball and you stick it in your mouth. You're like, ooh, that feels nice. That feels nice against my gums. That it's a little bouncy. It's a little chewy. It feels kind of good. I kind of like that feeling. But now drool is dripping down my neck, and I don't know if I like that so much. And, ooh, this is kind of cool. I think I like round, blue, chewy things. And then now we take the red block and we stick it in our mouth. And we, ow, that hurt. Ooh, that feels like it kind of cut into my gums. But there's something about the shape that I like gripping, maybe not in my mouth, but in my hands. And I like that when I slam it together with another one, it makes a loud sound, and that gets a big reaction from mom, and that's kind of cool. And, I think that I don't like red blocks in my mouth, but I like smashing them together, and I can use this to get mom's attention, right? So now that's a very microcosm of the very early experience. But what happens is that's what we do with life. Let me stick that in my mouth and see how that tastes. Let me throw myself into that and see how it feels. How is my body reacting? How does that feel? How are the people around me responding to what I'm doing? Is that good or is it bad? Right? And we start sifting and sorting through. And same thing, and this is when we talk about the good enough mother, right? So let's say mom comes up, you feel a pain in your belly. And you say, and of course I'm articulating this in a way a child is not going to obviously be having that inner monologue, but I'm saying it in such a way that we can understand it. But you have a pain in your belly, and all of a sudden it's like, that pain makes me want to yell. That pain makes water come out of my eyes. That pain makes me want to kick and flail because I need to get rid of that pain. And mom comes up and says, oh, do you want your blanket? No, the blanket doesn't make the pain go away. Oh, do you want your binky? No, that doesn't make the pain go away. Oh, do you want your bottle? Ooh, that makes the pain go away, right? So now we have not only are we having this inner experience, but we're also having this outer experience of someone mirroring back to you. You don't need this. You don't need that. This is what you need. Oh, that's what that feeling inside of me is asking for. So now repeat that a gazillion times. And instead of crying and screaming, the child goes, mama, bottle. Right? So this is play. Now, what happens if you have a parent? So let's say you have a kid now, and there's a lot that happens from 0 to 7. But let's say we have a 7-year-old now who ties on a little blanket around his neck, and he's zipping around the living room, jumping from the couch to the ottoman, to the coffee table, to the floor. Look at mom, I'm Superman. Look at me fly. Look at me go. And maybe mom says, oh, wow, look at you, big Superman. Look at you flying. That's great. But just don't jump on the table because, that might break, and we wouldn't want you to break a leg or something like that. So there's warmth, there's affirmation, there is a support of the child's abilities as they are testing them out. And then there's also guardrails for what the child doesn't really know or anticipate as yet, right? Whereas maybe you have another response, which is, what the hell are you doing? Get off the couch. You are messing up my furniture, and put your blanket back on the bed. I just made that this morning. You are such a nuisance. Go outside. I don't want to have to deal with you right now. Right? So there is, in the child's world, there is a message that, well, what I'm exploring, what I'm playing with, the testing of my abilities, the exploration of what I am and am not capable of, the idea that I could be capable of great strength and great things, and how I'm exploring that now through play and what that might mean for me is less important than the stability of the couch, right? Or the quality of the couch and the furniture. And so now we have this shifting of what's in here is most important to what's out there is most important.
Hmm.
And that can be extended to any number of ways we interact and look at the world, right?
Yeah. So, Brianna, by your definition, then, emotion, energy moving through the body.
Mm-hmm.
As a child, it sounds like you're saying that the child needs to play to get some trial and error on that energy moving through the body and how it's reflected back to them in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for adults, we've had so much trial and error that we can articulate more of this in an abstract way, but we're still testing because that's life.
Yes. I mean, and this is Piaget's cognitive stages of development. A child's brain is not cognitively mature. An adult's brain is. So our capacity for how we learn to sift and sort through things as children is obviously different than our capacity as an adult. But, Renee Spitz said that children will naturally come up against the brick wall of reality. So some parents will say, well, I have to teach them that's not the reality of the world, and I have to teach them how to toughen up now so that they'll survive the world. And Renee Spitz said, they are going to learn that soon enough. The world is going to let them know, don't you worry, the world will take care of its job. Whereas, for a parent's job is to give them the support and the resources and to be the safe sort of home base so that a child has more resiliency when butting up against the brick wall of reality, so to speak. I saw a movie recently. I wish I could tell you which one it was, but there was an exchange that was really important. And it was a father and a son, and the son was trying to achieve something in his career and profession, and he failed, and the father learned about it, and a large part of what was driving him was seeking his father's approval. And the father learned about it without his knowledge and came to him. And the son was basically like, I don't need your help. I don't need your approval, so on. And I'm a man. I have to figure it out. I got to do it on my own. I shouldn't have to I haven't to go running back to daddy to help me. And the father, who had been kind of a hard nose most of his life, takes his arm and hands him the check. And he says, actually, you're right. You should be able to go home to your dad and have your dad help you take care of it. And it was like, such a paradigm shift, right? Because we live in a society, at least in the capitalist society, Western society, is you got to get out and make it on your own. You got to do it. And you got to prove yourself and da 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 da. And this was sort of like, what if our parents were in fact a safe haven? What if they were always a source of support? What if that was actually the jumping off point for us to lead with curiosity rather than with a driving urge to prove our worth, because at the core of it, we doubt it already.
Mm-hmm. So, Brianna, now we've clarified this emotional confusion versus regular confusion. As we understand that now, how does a sense of our emotions with this lens of emotional confusion work in figuring out the value of our past in understanding our attachment style? Or is it even necessary?
I mean, I think that once you start work, so in my work, we do that through creativity. And to my mind, if your mind, if your cognitions, your beliefs, the thoughts that you have are like, let's say that's the gas, and your body, where you're holding a lot of historical information, the body keeps score, if the body's holding a lot of that information and the mind has all these thoughts about it, then to my mind, creativity, the body's like the car, right? And so the mind is the gas, the body's the car. Creativity is the nose for the hose that connects the gas to the car, right? It's what fills it up. And so this is when our thoughts become more coherent, more aligned with what we're actually carrying, which means that we can be much more directed, clear, and specific and discerning in how we're going to move through the world. So the emotional clarity comes from understanding that the unconscious mind and body doesn't usually organize things through words or through, prescriptive memory. It organizes things through symbol, metaphor, storytelling, and creativity. So a lot of the work that I do is also weaving in storytelling. So for instance, I have a membership and every third week we do a scripted practice where we tell a story about what we've been learning about, rewriting the story, and then we tap through it using like EFT tapping techniques. But it is, when you start working with things in that way, the past comes up as necessary, right? So we may get a flash of the past. We may get an inner child. We may get an inner critic that's protecting the inner child, right? We may get what Richard Schwartz calls a firefighter, but this is more an addictive self that comes up because the addictive self is protecting the inner child, right? Through the relief that the addiction brings. And so it comes up as necessary. But I think it is a little bit different. I am actually trained in psychoanalysis in the laying on the couch tradition, and my mentors were wonderful at using that modality and way of relating in unconscious spaces. But I have found that is useful, but it isn't necessarily the only way, let alone the most useful way to get at the material and to create clarity.
Mm-hmm. So the mind is the gas,
Mm-hmm.
the body is the vehicle, the engine,
Mm-hmm.
and creativity connects the two. It is the hose,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. When you have that connection going between the two, how does that translate to your goals? Does that make for a better attachment style? Does that make for letting go of an old relationship? All of the above?
I would say all of the above, because what I mean by creativity is thinking divergently, right? Allowing yourself to experience something in a new way. So obviously guided practices like meditation, guided visualization, those are opportunities where we can kind of get ourselves into a theta state, meaning our brain waves become a little more dreamy, and we soften some of those synapses we talked about earlier, and we open ourselves up to access information that we might not otherwise have access to, whether you want to call it the unconscious self or whether you want to call it a spiritual self or your higher knowing, or whatever the language is that fits there. But we are accessing information that exists within us that we have become, let's say, blind to because of that. Oh, everything out there is more important, so I should be looking out there, right? And so now we're sort of, scurrying around like ping pong balls or chickens with our heads cut off, trying to negotiate, putting everything out there just so that we can meet some erroneous standard of what it is I should be doing, and da-da-da-da-da. And now we're shifting that from, oh, wait, but the wisdom's inside of me, because what's inside of me is actually a connection to something bigger than me. And that's the way to access that, is actually down and through rather than around and over, so to speak. And I don't know if this is answering your question.
Yeah.
So the benefit is that when you are in a relationship and you're having, I'll give you, so there's, obviously being in a relationship, there's stages of relationship: pre-dating, dating, first few months, first couple years, long-term relationship. They're all going to have different needs, challenges, so on and so forth. But so the other day I got a question on my Instagram. I had posted something about shifting the balance when you had a breakup, and but you notice that they are liking your social media posts or they're looking at your stories or what have you. And a question was, so how do you make that work for you? Is it better for me if I privatize it so they don't get the satisfaction. And right in the question, we can see what's going on, right? That they're already trying to strategize something to control what the other person is feeling, and then elicit something for themselves, finding satisfaction in giving or withholding satisfaction from someone else. And so right away, we know this person has both a grandiose idea of how much power and control they think they have. And when you have a grandiose idea of how much power and control you think you have, on the flip side of it, there will always be a feeling of helplessness, that I have no control. If I believe that I have to control what's out there in order to control what's in here, I really believe I have no control. So we have to shift the whole question. Stop worrying about what will and won't satisfy them. It doesn't mean you shouldn't, if you privatize it, do it because that's an act of self-advocacy. Do it because that's a boundary that protects your peace. Do it because there's a part of you that cannot stop looking for the like from their profile, right? So that means there's an inner parent, so to speak, that needs to step in and say, you've had enough cookies, we need to put the jar away now for a while, right? And so it's also sort of like, sometimes I'll have people have mixed feelings about this, but sometimes, especially when we think about all the neurochemicals involved when we have these relationships, particularly intermittently reinforced relationships, it is a lot like healing from addiction. Yeah. Some people can do it cold turkey. Most people can't. So one of the things we have to realize is that when we start slipping into that strategizing, start thinking, fantasizing about what their reaction will be and so on and so forth, recognizing that there's an addictive quality to that sort of that compulsion and that rumination. And what is being served by that addiction that I have right now, by that thought loop? Like, that thought loop is protecting me, and some part of me thinks it's serving me in some way. So I have to think about what that is. And almost always it comes down to, it's going to secure connection in some way, because even if I can't connect to them in a healthy way, at least I'm connecting to them through my thought loops. Or it is about, it's really not or, it's usually and it makes us feel like we can assume some kind of control because I can control them in my mind. I can control the fantasy of satisfaction. I can control the idea that if I privatize or don't privatize my account, they'll have an emotional reaction, and that emotional responsiveness affirms the validity of my feelings and my right to have them. Yeah. So that means that if you're going to go cold turkey, you got to put supports and things that are going to fill that gap for you, so that spinning has a way to titrate and shift into something else.
Okay. So we've used different modalities that you've talked about, like psychedelics and also like creativity, to do what seems to be maybe the same thing, kind of opening up new branches. Mm-hmm. And then by opening up new branches, we can think about our situation in a different way, and that can help us to tune down the emotional response. And is that what we're saying now?
I wouldn't say tune it down. I would say transmute it.
Okay.
Because when we try to turn something down, we're pushing against, and that's always going to create a form of resistance. So if you ignore the messenger, it's just going to knock harder. Mm-hmm. But I will say, because emotions are energy flowing through the body, if you're in a moment of urgency / feel like you're bordering on panic, either like that level of anxiety, it's going to have to be your body. You're going to have to move your body in some way, because your body is the most immediate and useful resource you have for moving energy.
Okay. So we're talking about this like an addiction, these relationships, and we're assuming good intent. If people mm-hmm. just have a certain attachment style, how important do you think intention is in understanding the truth of these situations, having better relationships?
Can you tell me a little more about what you mean by the truth of the relationship?
So, yeah, truth is a tricky thing, huh? It would seem that you could have a relationship with someone and you could walk away from it and think, well, that person they had an attachment style that wasn't a match for me. Mm-hmm. And that was tough. but I have now this feeling like I'm addicted to them, and it's really difficult. Or you might look at those patterns of behavior and say, wait a minute, I believe there was intention here. And I believe that this person was pushing and pulling as a strategy to keep my attention and to disturb me. And that's a different story that you would tell. And if it's accurate, then that would be more true.
Well, now this is just diagnostic indicators. So that person who's doing it intentionally still has an attachment style. But they
So the intention thing and the attachment style, these are different layers that would sort of be overlapping?
Yes. So attachment style is a big, broad umbrella.
Okay.
If you have someone who's intentionally being manipulative, that's like a personality diagnostic indicator. So we're just looking at how severe have they adapted.
Okay.
So someone who would, I mean, this is not, I don't think we even have personality diagnoses anymore in the DSM, but people still talk about them, access to diagnoses. But someone who has a presentation frequency of thought, attitude, behavior that is severe enough that intention becomes malicious, sadistic, or manipulative, then what's happened is their inner world has become so rigid and crystallized that they are what we call treatment resistant, right? So this is why they're going to have a spiritual awakening, in my opinion, before that could ever change. Because oftentimes what's happened is either they have experienced such severe history and trauma that this is the way they've learned to survive and there's no arguing with it. Or it can also sometimes be neurological, like there's a deficit in the mirror neurons in the brain, or there's some malformation or some kind of dysfunction in the parts of the brain that support empathy and social relating, impulse control, so on and so forth. That also can be true. But intention does matter. I mean, intention is not an excuse. Whenever we're looking at conflicts, people can sometimes say, well, I didn't intend to do it, so you don't have the right to be mad at me. Right? That's not the case. We always want to look at impact first and then intention second. But intention can and does matter, especially when we look at things like stonewalling, for example. People use the term stonewalling to describe what they observe, which is someone closing up, shutting down, being non-responsive, right? And I have noticed that there's two forms of stonewalling, intentional and unintentional. So intentional stonewalling is when we might see it being used as a manipulative tactic to try to regain control by withdrawing engagement because they know it's going to trigger their partner into becoming increasingly anxious and destabilized, and that makes them feel more in control when they have felt out of control. Now, you don't have to be pathological to do that. People do that all the time who exist on a normal spectrum. It's not nice, but people do it when they feel threatened. Right? Now, if someone is doing it, however, in tandem with gaslighting, in tandem with, what do they call it? Darvo, right? Deflect. It's all the mean things people do, like the intentionally sadistic things.
Yeah, I can fill in there. That's deny, accuse, reverse victim and offender.
Yes, there it is. When they're doing this often enough that it is, in fact, a strategy, it is, in fact, that's the way they're relating across the board. Now we've got access to personality going on and or something deeper. And that is not a situation where, if I just show up with better communication skills and I'm more vulnerable and honest about my feelings and I create a safe space for them, then they're going to be nicer to me and this relationship will grow. That is someone who's going to have to be doing the work on themselves intentionally, wanting to do the work on themselves and being committed to it before any of that stuff you can provide is going to make a dent. And so what we're really looking at is the spectrum of extremity. So if someone has a presentation that would qualify them as having a personality disorder, so to speak, narcissism, borderline personality disorder, and so on, it's because whatever they've experienced was severe enough that those habitual patterns, feelings, and thoughts became so rigid and codified within them that it's treatment resistant, to use the clinical term. And as I said before, unless they're doing the work on themselves, it doesn't matter how wonderful your partner is. The wonderful partner is going to wind up feeling secure and destabilized because unless that person's working on themselves, this is what they have determined is the way to survive and get what they need and want.
Yeah.
It's not going to change without concerted effort.
Mm-hmm. It seems that people would come to you when they are in pain. That people are finding your stuff, they're going down that YouTube rabbit hole at, late hours of the night, and they're looking for that. When someone is in pain and they find you, how important is this intention question? Do you work with people to discern this? Do you suggest that some people just step out of relationships entirely rather than trying to mend because maybe a partner is treatment resistant, as you say?
Mm-hmm. So I guess it depends on the capacity within which they're coming to work with me. So someone who's working with me in psychotherapy, there's a different quality to that container. But I will say across the board, whether it's psychotherapy or coaching, I like to work very structurally. I'm not someone who believes in endless therapy. So I usually, when someone comes to work with me, I'll tell them I like to work in either 6, 9, or 12 session increments. And then I have a pretty structured curriculum that we sort of follow to lay the groundwork of what they are contending with, what's coming up for them, and to really look at what's going to be of service to them based on where they're coming from. And most people who come to me they've already done some work, they've already read some books, they've already had some therapy. They are coming to me because of the way I talk about attachment. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of blessed in the sense that I have some really amazing people who come and work with me. And that's across the board, all attachment styles. I have some really wonderful people that come to me, heart and hand. Oftentimes, as you said, they are in pain or they've just gone through a really big catalytic experience. And they're sort of humbled in a way. And that's a wonderful place to be because you're more malleable when you're humbled. And that means you get to make more conscious choices about what your next steps are going to be, right? And what that is going to attract and manifest for you in your life. And so there's also, even though there's this sense of like, oh, I'm surrendered because I'm helpless, I feel helpless, like nothing I've done has worked. And, and now I feel like I have no control. Excellent. Yay. Finally. Right?
Yeah.
Now you're ready. And then there's just wonderful things that can happen from there,
What wonderful things? I mean, let's have it.
Well, we have like, it kind of gets into this definition of healing, right? So when people come to me, a lot of the times they think to be healed, I have to eliminate my anxiety. So secure people don't worry as much as I do. So when I learn how to worry less, I'll be more secure, right? But security is not about eliminating the worry. It's about changing your relationship to it. So maybe you have an epigenetic inheritance that you're just naturally a little more responsive, effusive, reactive to certain things in your life. So instead of saying that means I'm not secure, or instead of saying that means I'm doomed to a life of feeling anxious and out of control in every aspect of my life, we change the story to I have this gift of sensitivity. And I have this gift of being able to see possibilities and predict outcomes. And I have this amazing emotional intelligence that tunes me into what's going on in my environment and the love relationships in my life. And so now that I know that these are my superpowers, I have this awesome gift and responsibility of caring for them, which means caring for my body in the same way that you would get your car oiled as often as you need to and fill it up with gas, right? Like these are your divine gifts. We don't want to eliminate that to make you more secure. We're not trying to whitewash everybody into being, Zen and on top of a mountain. There are tremendous gifts that person has to offer. So what we want to do is we want to sort of talk to the voices that say, this makes you high maintenance. This makes you too much. This makes you too intense. Da 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 da. We want to talk to those voices in those parts and say, hey, that story probably served me at some point. I'm sure it did. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there, right? These stories that we adopted, they're not wrong. We are this way because it worked for a while. We are this way because it was the most functional way to be in whatever dysfunctional environment we were in. And maybe it wasn't even dysfunctional. I mean, that's another critical word. Like, it was just the environment that we were in. And so we learned the most functional negotiation between our biology and our inheritance and our temperament. And however we are, that is the best way we could figure it out. And if we're here, it was successful.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying is we embrace it. So anxiety is a superpower that I have. And so I'm not even going to call it anxiety anymore. I'm going to call it something else. I call it open-hearted.
Okay. So as we talked about in the beginning, understanding attachment styles, crucial to success in relationships, but it's not about necessarily developing a secure style, or is it being the kind of person who maybe didn't have a secure style, knowing yourself, but working into that style?
So then let's define secure.
Please.
Right? So secure is that you are in relationship with the different parts of yourself. So if you find yourself leaning towards what the world would call anxious attachment because you ticked off some boxes that said, I think, feel, and act this way more often than not, right? Then we want to take a look at healing as being, I'm going to move into a more aligned story about how these things actually serve me. And being secure with myself means that I've embraced my anxiety, that I've found the strengths, the gifts, and the lessons within it. And I know that it's going to be one of my teachers in life. And so the minute you adopt that in earnest, you're secure. And actually, I would say you're probably secure before that, because everybody has a secure person in them. But the stories we've acquired, sort of like, if you could imagine a light bulb, and over time and years, dust and paint and grit and grime gets coated over that light bulb. And so now we have this catalytic moment and we're like, oh, I feel anxious, avoidant, or what have you. I should be more secure. It's not a process it's a process of just wiping off the grime. Like, it's already there. You are already secure. It's just, what are the stories that are telling you you're not? And now you're behaving in response to those stories. Right? So if we can change those stories now, you can embrace whatever you are defining as anxious, avoidant, or what have you, and we can learn from it. And now you're in relationship to it. So you're at ease with yourself. I am not anxious. I have anxiety, and it's one of my teachers in this lifetime.
Okay. So we have stories and we have behavior. I can see the changing of the story being something that could be done relatively quickly. Mm-hmm. Maybe with, some reflection and things. Mm-hmm. Changing of behavior, I assume, takes longer. How do we get to the behavior?
Well, so behavior is about developing emotional control.
Okay.
And emotional control is not about emotional suppression, right? Emotional control is when you are at the point where we've started with emotional confusion, right? And now we have surrendered enough of our ego to explore the idea that there's something here for me to work out and clarify, right? And I'm open to new ideas about how I might organize this energy so that through things like play, metaphor, experiential exercises, and creativity, I can develop a metaphorical, symbolic, experiential language for the energy moving through my body. And as I start to develop that language, now I am able to find and select and build my emotional vocabulary from a larger lexicon, let's say. And as I build that emotional lexicon, I'm becoming more fluent. and my words are becoming more precise, and I'm articulating what I'm feeling with greater maturity and sophistication. And so now, as I'm starting to do that, I am not afraid to feel all my feelings. I'm not afraid of feeling hurt. I'm not afraid of grief. I'm not afraid of sadness. I'm not afraid of rejection. I'm not afraid of anger, because feelings are my friends and they're all information about how aligned or unaligned I am with the essence of my being and what I'm here to do and learn about myself. So I'm not afraid of any of it because I know all of it has something for me. And now I have emotional control.
Emotional control then being unafraid of your vast vocabulary of emotions.
I feel anger. I feel it coming up. I'm not going to suppress it, but I am going to find a safe place to express it.
Okay.
I am going to find a safe way to do it so it doesn't lay waste to my relationships. I am going to take a moment and say, ooh, I'm angry. I better go find a way to do that rather than just allow my fist to reach out and punch somebody in the face, right? Yeah. We have a pause. Emotional control is the ability to take that pause and have the discussion with your inner observer, right?
So for that person who you talked about earlier, who sees anger as, I think you described it as something like a trap door that would plunge you into an abyss. Mm-hmm. So for that person, how do they get from that trap door feeling to now I can understand this, I can see it, and I'm going to go and take a moment?
So I have a client who had that concern. And what we do in my work is we start by connecting to the body. So that may look like a sensory experience. So what does it look like to start just by being quiet, breathing evenly, feeling the ridges of your fingertips as you rub your fingers together, closing your eyes, imagining that there is a seed in your sacrum, and that you are watering that seed and you're giving it sunlight, and that seed grows into a tree. And as it evolves, branches grow and blossoms form. What fruits does your tree bear? And we go back in and we keep checking in on that tree. What fruit has it borne this time? Is there other vegetation now? Are there things living in and around this tree? Does the tree have knots? Where did those knots come from? And now we are looking at the inner world and space as this fun place to explore. And all of these images and journeys and stories we're telling around what's growing and evolving inside of you becomes the energy of you grounding in and rooting into what you are. And as we start doing that, now, once we have a solid sense of that tree that is rooted and blossoming and bearing fruit, once that feels more solid, now maybe we draw it on the page. Now, maybe you say, okay, we've got the tree. What if the tree were angry? How might the tree look? And so they're drawing, and maybe it starts with just, maybe it doesn't even look like a tree. Maybe it's just like this. It's just black and red scribbles on the page. And it looks like anger, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right? And we're like, okay, what if this angry drawing, it needed something? Ask it. What does it need? Well, it needs containment, just pulling it out of my head, right? How could we give it containment? I don't know. I drew all the way over to the edges. Well, let's get some more paper. Let's make it huge. Let's make let's paste together 5 pieces of poster board and make it enormous and draw a big circle around it, right? And now let's look at it up close. All I see are black and red swipes. I don't know. I can't make sense of it. Okay, let's look at it 10 feet back. Well, now it doesn't seem so big and overwhelming. And now it looks like this big, right? And now what we're doing is we are physically creating a relationship to our anger in ways that we are exerting control over it. We are externalizing it. So it's not in me anymore. It's out there. I can talk to it. I can draw lines around it. I can give it something it might need. I can cut it up and make it into a new collage. And now maybe it's actually figurative. And now that my anger looks like a figure, I can talk to it rather than have it overwhelm me in the moment. Right? So this is that process of getting in touch with and building that lexicon.
Wow. For understanding just the vocabulary of emotions on on like a literal verbal level, and being able to kind of point to them. Any exercises for that?
Well, first thing I might say is you don't have to do that.
Really? Okay.
That I think we, people like it when you can say, tell me how you feel. And they want to hear it because they need to hear it in order to feel a certain way, right? But that's their issue. So what you might say is, you might be someone like, I wish I was more articulate, right? Okay, as long as that's your intention. So you might say, you just name what's going on in the moment. I'm having a big feeling moving through me right now. There's a lot of energy that I'm holding. I don't have the words for it. So I think what I'm needing is to take a little break so I can sit with the energy until I have some words. And they may not be complicated words, but that's what I can offer right now.
Yeah.
I hope that's okay.
Yeah. Can we work through this by ourselves, or because it's a relationship issue, do we need to be in some sort of relationship, and maybe it's with a professional, a close friend or something to really get there?
I don't think it's necessary, but I will say it depends on what end of the spectrum you're starting on. So if you are someone who leans towards avoidance, for example, and your habit is and you don't, it's not because you don't, it's not because you're aloof or withdrawn or what have you, but it's because no one even modeled for you or taught you what it's like to invite someone into an emotional experience without losing yourself in it. Or if your experience has been around emotionally dismissive people, you were never taught how to share emotional space. So what happens, and this is, I think, what a lot of people observe and why they get so confused, is that when an avoidant partner meets someone and they do feel that elation and they do feel that infatuation and they seem to be all in at first, it's because they haven't had the experience because all the feelings come up and they never learned how to sift and sort and be in control of that. So it comes up and you're like, I love it because it feels good. And my God, that's fucking scary. And so now, and I'm articulate, they wouldn't even know that that's scary to them. It's just, it's like, and then they have to pull back. Right? That's the stonewalling that I was talking about. Like, so there's intentional and then there's unintentional. And when they've done studies on people who are unintentionally stonewalling, it looks like they don't care. But really what's happening is their anxiety is through the roof inside. The electrodes in their body and brain are like off the chart and they're locking it down. And that's a difficult response to shift, because a natural response to panic and threat like that is to shake it off. We look at somatic experiencing. Peter Levine describes this really well when he talks about how when an animal is being chased, right, or being hunted down, and they manage to escape the threat, they literally shake to get rid of it from their nervous system. But what avoidant partners do is they feel that, and then they lock it up. So there's it doesn't go through. So when they meet someone and there's an elation, it comes up and it feels great at first and then it feels scary. And then when the scary part kicks in, we lock up. Right? So, I'm sorry, I lost my thread. What was your question again?
I think that we started with the process of developing the vocabulary,
Yes.
but then you kind of inverted it.
Okay. Oh, yes. You don't necessarily need it, right?
Yeah.
So part of it is that, so I think that we can solve that by simply saying, I don't have the words. And I think it's just being honest about what you're experiencing presently and energetically. And there are many people who have wonderful, long, secure, loving relationships where one person being verbose and verbal is just not their thing. But they're very honest about what they're holding in the moment. And they carry presence, right? I will say oftentimes, particularly with fearful avoidance, maybe verbal expression isn't their thing, but creativity is. I've noticed that a lot of disorganized and fearful avoidant folks have amazing expression, artistic expression. the lack of verbal access, it comes out in all these other ways. And so now, and those are ways that can touch us on a heart soul level that words cannot.
Well, Brianna, you see this topic in a lot of ways that surprise me and run both broader and deeper than what you can find in an internet search. What do you think people know about this that maybe isn't getting out that you find particularly interesting?
Well, I think what I've noticed is that, well, it's interesting because when I started talking about attachment styles online, it was really kind of new. Heller and Levine wrote the book Attached, and it was starting to gain some momentum. And but most people hadn't heard of it. And so even in my marketing, when I was marketing about attachment styles, it was always kind of new and interesting, and people would be attracted to that. Then COVID hit. And we had everyone's online and everyone's struggling in their relationships because everyone's in close quarters and, getting really sick of each other. And, I saw a massive market sophistication occur where now, like, you just go out and meet someone at a party and everybody's at least heard of attachment styles, right? So it's really fascinating to me. And I think what's coming up on the heels of that now is this tremendous body awareness. I mean, and especially in the realms of psychotherapy and clinical applications, that we are shifting to, that traditional image of lying on the couch and having the therapist behind you and you're sort of free associating or what have you, right? Which is still a great intervention. But we're switching from the therapist as mirror to the therapist as relational, and as the work being two bodies in the same room, and there's a body to body communication that's going on, and this is a large part of what we are negotiating in the realms of mental and emotional health. But I'm going to say that's our spiritual conundrum as a species. How do we take up space and share space, right? Mm. I mean, how do we be a self and yet relate to the other without losing self, right?
Yeah. Well, Briana MacWilliam, before we get to our last topic, for people who want to know more of your particular view on all of this and all of your experience, where should people look for you online?
Sure. Well, my website is briannamacwilliam.com, and then I am on all of the socials, so YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Yeah.
Excellent. We'll put links in the description for people to check out. And Brianna, my last question is really just, what has it been like for you to help so many people with the issue of attachment style?
It's funny. I will go to like family functions or things, and people will start talking to me about something I posted. And, or I was just standing on the corner of New York and someone walked up to me and said, "Your YouTube has been instrumental to me," and like recognized me, a stranger recognized me. And that's very weird because even though like when you're on social media, it seems like you're everywhere and you're out and about and you're talking like an interview like this, or you're talking to people. But in reality, I'm in my office, in my home, and I really don't even need to leave my house if I don't want to for like days on end, right? So when I talk to people and they feel like they already know me, or they start quoting me back to myself, it's a little bit weird because it's sort of like I'm putting it out there, but I don't have a visceral, tangible way of feeling how it's always being received. So it's been kind of a wild ride, honestly. I've been doing this for the online space has been about 10 to 13 years now. And prior to that was more in private spaces for about 10 years. But it's pretty wild. But it's also I think there's a lot of craziness going on in the world right now, but I feel very hopeful and very heartened by the amazing people who come to me and comment on my stuff. Like, I've been very blessed. I very rarely have negative feedback on my social media. I don't have trolls. I feel like I've been very blessed in attracting people who are conscientious, who are thoughtful, and that allows me to have a more hopeful perspective on the world and on relationships, because it starts there, right? Our relationship to ourselves. And the more we can improve that, the more we improve our relationship to others, the more we improve our relationship to community, the more we're going to improve the world as a whole.
Yeah, it shows. Some of my past guests pointed me to you, and one thing they mentioned was, hey, this is a really positive take on this hard thing in relationships. Brianna has this really special perspective. So I commend you for being that, and I see it and hear it from others.
Oh, that's very nice to hear, actually. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Briana MacWilliam, for being the person who brings that unique perspective, for bringing your experiences from so many different venues and putting it together in this topic that's so important for so many people. Thank you. And thank you for joining me for this interview.
Absolutely. I'm glad to come, and thank you for having me.